Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex Bozich and I are joined by Eddie Cotton, currently a senior at IU. Eddie is one of the founders of the Hoosier Net. You probably remember seeing his sideline reporting for Big Ten Student U broadcasts of Hoosier hysteria, things like that. Well, Eddie wrote a terrific column this week about Devante Green. Really gave some interesting insight into Devante, his life growing up, and kind of what that has meant to the player that he is today. And so we wanted to talk with Eddie about that article, get some insight from him on Devante, who obviously is going to be a very, very important player for this program moving forward. And then we talked to Eddie about some other topics, his thoughts on Jerome Hunter and Jerome's potential readiness to be ready to go next year, and just his general thoughts on the program as he winds down his last year as a student at Indiana. Eddie always offers a lot of really good insight, so we appreciate him taking the time, and I think you'll really enjoy the conversation. Before we get to that, a few words real quick about this week's sponsor, which is Home Field. And at homefieldapparel.com, you will find the comfiest and most unique licensed IU apparel that is available anywhere. Home Field was started by an IU grad, and all Home Field apparel is designed and printed out of Indianapolis. And of course, now that it is, it's not even March anymore, it's now April. The NCAA tournament obviously almost over with the Final Four coming up this weekend. But Home Field has you covered as they always do. And even though Indiana is no longer playing, you can still go to Home Field and find your favorite vintage IU apparel from Home Field and wear it proudly as a signal that you believe that better days are ahead. And they have a lot of new items, so if you haven't been there recently, you can find the Bison Tri-Blend t-shirt. That's the t-shirt with the Bison logo. We've talked about the hoodie sweatshirt, but now they have it in a t-shirt. They've got the Script Indiana logo on a hoodie now. They've got a sweatshirt version of the Hoosier Shoes logo, and lots of other great stuff there. So go to homefieldapparel.com, find what you need or what you need for a gift for the Hoosier lover that's in your life. And don't forget to use the promo code BRINK at checkout for 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. That's BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at homefieldapparel.com. Home Field, wear one for the team. And now, here's our conversation with Eddie Cotton. All right, we are joined this week by Eddie Cotton, who is wrapping up his final year at IU. You're graduating this year, right?
Yeah, I got like 4 weeks left. Don't remind me.
Well, you're also getting ready to enjoy your last little five in Bloomington. How are you preparing for that?
Well, I'm on the race broadcast itself, so I've been preparing by going to the track and studying notes, unlike other people who are preparing for what's going to be a crazy week.
How have you always covered the race like that, or have you ever been able to just kind of like relax and take it in like most students do?
Since sophomore year, I've been covering the race in the pits, and then freshman year, I didn't know enough about Little Five to actually enjoy it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's turn our attention to basketball, because as I mentioned in the intro, you wrote a great piece about Devonte Green this week, and we're going to link it in the show notes. And this conversation certainly shouldn't replace people actually going and reading that article. Highly recommend it. What were one of the 2 or 3 biggest insights that you like? What do you feel like you learned about Devante, having talked with him and gotten to know him a little bit through that story that you didn't know before?
Well, first, of course, is the background with his family. I had no idea about that, but I knew there was something more there. Just kind of talking to him, you can kind of tell that he's a little guarded, and the way he kind of just talks, that there's something more there, but I didn't know what it was. So that's the first thing. And then the other biggest thing I think with Devante is that he's calculated, and he's very calculated, and he knows what he's going to do before he does it. And he thinks about this stuff. So the little things like his tattoos, he thinks about the meaning behind that, his Instagram posts, his hashtag green light. All these things are in some sort of way calculated. And I think it's indicative of a person that does that for confidence a little bit, but also does that because it gives him reminders of what's kind of important to him. Like his tattoos, he can look down and see, like, one of his tattoos was a cartoon tattoo about invincibility. It's like one of the star from Mario, the Mario Brothers, and he has the eyes crossed out because it's bad to think you're invincible. And he can look down at that and always think about that. So I just found it very intriguing that he's so calculated with things.
Eddie, when you set out to do this story, we obviously talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but historically the access at IU hasn't always been the greatest with the basketball program. But the fact that we had the open locker rooms for the NIT, you mentioned that as something that kind of gave you the ability to get in there and actually talk to Devonte. When did you, I guess, decide that this was a topic that you wanted to pursue, and kind of how was, how difficult, I guess, was it to get him to open up and talk about some of these things?
Well, I've definitely interacted with Devonte in the past. Not too much, but he's gotten to the point where I think he knows who I am, and I think trusts me, which is very important. But I knew going into the NIT locker rooms, because if you ever say to me, open locker room, I think of all the weird things I can turn into a story, because you give me 30 minutes to actually talk to these kids and do it face to face. I'm going to get different answers. I'm going to get better answers. I'm going to get realer answers. So, like, there's another story that I have waiting that will be a bit different, a bit of a teaser for it. But I knew if Indiana made it to the third game in the NIT that I wanted to do something on Devonte, because I could tell just like there's a little bit more there with, like I said, the calculated social media stuff. And also I just knew no one really approached the idea of his relationship with his brother that much, and whether like coming out of his shadow was an issue for him, because when he got here, everyone just knew he was Danny's brother. And me personally, if I was Devonte, I would kind of hate that. So I thought that was interesting. And then what it turned out to was a story that I didn't know was there. And a lot of it just came on accident. Part of it, and I explained this to you before, was I asked him about how many NBA experiences he's had because of Danny. And he said when he was growing up, it was really difficult because his father left in 5th grade. And I don't know if he kind of intended to say that, because he's never talked about that in the past. But I asked him a little bit more about it. He was comfortable talking about it. And then after the fact, I did my research and found out his entire family situation, which is incredibly difficult to deal with.
I think one of the, and this, I don't know if this is even going to come out as a question, but it's more of I think a compliment to you, and you can speak to it a little bit as well. And just in terms of the feedback you've gotten or what people have said to you on social media. But I think one of the great things about the fact that you did this is so many times, and as someone that tries to moderate a message board that often goes out of control after a loss, I think so many times people look at these players as just basketball players there to do a job for them as fans, and these are people, human beings, all of us. We all have our issues, we all have our problems in life, we all have the things that we've tried to overcome. And I think the great thing about this is that, and I think one thing that IU could really do better of, and this is just in general, you humanize the players more, and then the fan base can connect to them better. And I think that's one of the great things you've done here. What has been the response, I guess, from fans and people that have read the story? I noticed this morning it's got over 10,000 views, which is terrific.
Yeesh.
But what's I guess, is that maybe the thing you take away from it the most, is that you've been able to kind of tell the story that nobody knew? And what's been the feedback that you've gotten?
Well, the feedback, it seems like everywhere, has been just people saying, oh my God, I want to like hug this kid. And certain people pointing out that anyone who's ever said anything bad about Devonte should realistically like calm down in every way possible, because they realize that this is a real person. And there are some people saying like it's good to know that this basketball team has real people. And there's a lot of people that are sitting there excited about Devonte Green, knowing there's a reason for who he is and what he is. And that's going to be what pushes him into next year. And I think a lot of people are excited about what his senior year can be, barring any injuries that kind of impacted him this year. But the adjustment he's made with Archie and how they've kind of figured it out to mesh together recently has been good signs. So like everyone is just kind of happy about it. And I think every person who read that story now has an opportunity to see Devonte Green in a different light and be understanding of what he's gone through and what he's become. And I think that's helpful as a fan base. So you don't have people just running around tweeting, Devonte should transfer, everyone should transfer, fire everyone, because you don't say that about real people. If you're friends with someone, you don't roast them and you don't come after them. So if you understand what they've been through, that's not going to happen. And I think that's important. I think that should happen at every program. If you have the opportunity to tell these stories, it's what makes sports special, not just the athleticism of it, but the stories behind them and the path that these people have taken to get to where they are. So I think it's important.
Amen. We've been banging that drum for a long time. And it's especially what makes college sports important. You know, It's like these guys are walking the same path you did when you went to school there. And I think, you read something like that and it reminds you of that, Alex, because you're right. It's so easy to get caught up, like, especially if you don't go to games and you're watching them on TV. It's like they're two-dimensional characters in jerseys running around playing basketball. And you forget that the vast majority of their life, they're a college student outside of that. And that's what your story really brought home with Devonte. The evolution of the fan base's relationship with Devonte over the past month has been really interesting to watch because, in addition to your story coming out, Devonte delivered some of the best play of his career. And really, and Alex, you and I talked about this on a recent episode, like, it really seems like a page was turned or a switch was flipped, whatever metaphor that you want to use. And I'm curious if you have any insights into why this was such an up and down season for Devonte. From, last offseason, everybody really talking about, hey, this could be a breakout for him. He's going to be, a starter and a lead guard, to, Robert Finney taking over the job and Devonte struggling and dealing with some injuries, getting suspended, and then this flourish of play at the end of the year. Like, why do you think, do you have any insight into why this was such a roller coaster for him as a junior?
I will say a great deal of it was those injuries at the beginning of the year. His dad talked to me about the fact that his chemistry was really off because he kind of took some time to get back adjusted after the early season injuries, and the chemistry was a problem. And then if you notice, it's the shooting that kind of became stellar towards the end of the season, because he just was out of rhythm in the beginning of the year. And then I think another part of it that his dad kind of was adamant about with me is Devonte is an incredibly difficult player to coach because he plays that New York style of basketball. He's flashy. He does things that most coaches kind of hate, but they still work. So I think part of that has been watching, I guess, Archie kind of adjust to that and figure out, like, wait a second, I would yell at everybody for taking that shot, but for some reason Devonte made it. I don't know how he did. Maybe I should give him more of a leash and give him more of a comfort zone and let him be okay with being flashy, because it's worth it. Even the turnovers and the mistakes that are going to come for the positives that you're going to get out of him taking those threes, him forcing the issue on the fast break and with these creative passes. So I think it's been a comfort zone that the two have kind of found over the last 2 months. And that's something that I think has been difficult, just observing it, because of the whole Tom Crean leaving, because Tom Crean would have let Devonte do whatever in the world he wanted, I think. So I think that the relationship that had to be built there is kind of now at its best point and kind of sets you up for what will be probably a pretty darn good senior year.
Well, let's talk about that senior year because, look, I mean, if he plays like he did at the end of this season, he's going to put up some great numbers. You know, that I mean, he played at pretty much an all Big Ten level, really, over the final 7 games of the season. What sense do you get about the way that he's embracing leadership? Because that's what's going to be so important for he and Deron, you know, to really take over the leadership. And this year you had Juwan, who was already there. It was kind of his team. Then you've got obviously a much hyped freshman, Romeo Langford, and this freshman class coming in. And I think all of us just watching it, it looked like it never gelled as you would hope that it would. How do you think Devonte will approach now? It pretty clearly, like, if he wants it, this is his team next year because he's the senior and he's going to be one of the best players. How do you think he will approach that?
I think it'll be interesting. Some of the quotes that didn't make it into this story were about Juwan and how Devonte has been able to learn from Juwan on being a vocal leader, an honest leader, and a consistent leader. Those were kind of the biggest things with Juwan because Juwan always spoke up. He always said how he thought, and he never strayed from that. And it was consistent. He talked about how he's observed that and is going to try and kind of utilize a little bit of that next season. But I wouldn't be surprised because that's not really his personality type completely to be a vocal leader like that. And I think Deron, I guess, is kind of the same. He's not the most serious guy, which is a good thing to have on a team. But I don't know if he's a guy you point to and say you're captain. But something that Juwan said, I talked to him after the NIT game, and he said 2 of the biggest leaders on this team will probably be Finney and Durham, which I thought was interesting because of their age, but he's probably not wrong. And then he also went on to say that it's probably going to be a bit of a leadership by committee type thing. So I think Devonte is ready for whatever kind of leadership role he needs to have, but I think there are more leaders on this team than there were in the past because you get an older Al Durham and you get an older Rob Finney who's been through his freshman year. You combine that with kind of the more relaxed style of Devonte and Deron, and you got guys you can look to that I think better set this team up than they were set up this year.
Eddie, when we talked back in October, I went back and looked. We had you on right after Hoosier Hysteria.
Yes.
A lot has obviously, it's actually 6 months to this date that we had you on. So a lot has changed. I feel like maybe I've aged a couple of years just from covering the season. I think there's a lot of things that went wrong this year, but if you had to point to 1 or 2 at the top of a list of many, what would you say tops the list for you in terms of why this season didn't turn out as it perhaps could have when it all started?
I think that the 2 things are, 1, obviously the injuries, and it's annoying for me when people are like, you can't use that as an excuse. Well, it doesn't help. It really doesn't help when you have those early season injuries. And then I think the other thing realistically was chemistry. And I think mentality, because I think you saw it in certain games, like that Michigan State game on the road. They looked confident. They looked like they knew they had a chance. And there were so many games this year. You could point at the Nebraska game at home, the Minnesota game at home, on the road, and just say, this team doesn't look mentally ready for this moment. Like, they're not confident, and I don't think some of the personalities meshed, and I don't think some of the playing styles meshed, because it was incredibly intriguing and weird to see this offense with Romeo Langford and kind of how it was run, because of course he's incredibly talented and played really well, but the offense at times was either reliant on him and Juwan, or there were times where it wasn't really reliant on Romeo at all. And I think it was weird like that. And I don't think there was, I guess, a mental chemistry, an understanding between the guys on the team and what was really going on. And I think there was a lack of confidence that I don't think will be there next year. I really don't.
So that kind of leads right into my next question. I think the biggest topic that I have brought up to me on maybe a daily basis is, why is this going to be any better next year? And I think you maybe alluded to it in your eyes there at the final part of your answer. But Do you see a scenario next year where Indiana's a much better team? Do you think they'll be the same? Do you think it's impossible to predict because we don't know the roster. We obviously don't know who's going to be healthy, who can play. But is there a strong possibility in your mind that Indiana is going to be a better team next year?
I think the first thing that intrigues me about this team next year that makes me think they're going to be better is just the fact that it's another Archie Miller recruiting class. And it's not to say anything about the kids that are Tom Crean kids, but I mean, I went over with Devonte. It took a while to find that comfort zone where he felt good with Archie. Archie felt good with him. And with these recruits, I don't think there is that buffer period, especially if you look at the personalities of the guys that Archie has brought in. Archie has not brought in a bad person into the recruiting class. He's never, like, Trace Jackson Davis is the sweetest kid. Armand Franklin is the sweetest kid with a great basketball IQ because his aunt is the women's basketball coach at Penn State. You look at the guys that were in this last recruiting class. Rob Finnessy, he's a quiet, smart kid who can run the offense and be confident. Jake Forrester, also the sweetest kid. He's a little absurd, but he's so sweet. And these are good kids that I think if you keep bringing in those good kids, it helps your chemistry. It helps your dedication, the defense, because these are kind of kids that just want to win. And I think that'll be part of why it's better. And then I think you look at the roster, another year, Rob Finnessy, kid's only going to get better. Devonte Green seemingly has figured it out. And for all hope he has, Jerome Hunter has the potential to be an incredible basketball player for this team if he plays, because we don't know anything. But his ability to shoot the ball, his ability to get to the basket, Trace Jackson Davis at the 4, Deron Davis at the 5, and you've got a rotation that includes Race Thompson, Armand Franklin, Al Durham, and you've got depth there. And you've got, I think, just kids that will fit this system. And with another year of Rob Finnessy and another year of Devonte, I think this is a different team. And a healthy Deron. Every day Deron
knock on wood.
Yeah. Every day Deron wakes up with a different body part in pain. And giving him a full offseason, he talked to me about this, how there's nothing more important to him right now than just getting to the offseason, because he thinks he'll be much better next season with the full offseason.
You used an interesting adjective there a few times to describe the guys when you said sweet. And I know exactly what you mean by that. Yeah. And I think even as frustrating as the last 3 years have been, I think most Indiana fans are very happy with the character of the players that have represented the university and how they have gone about it. You know, this has been a program that for them, you know, you can be proud to watch them play and the guys that are representing. At what point do you think Indiana needs some guys that maybe have a little bit more of an attitude that aren't quite as sweet? Like, do you think that the program needs that? Has there been any of that lacking? And would that have maybe helped to shake the team out of some doldrums that they had at times this year? Or do you think that there is some of that on the roster, or that's overrated at all?
Well, I think there's definitely that on the roster right now. A guy like Devonte, who's from New York, and I'll say as a person that's from New York, he's willing to say what he thinks, which is helpful. But when I say that these kids are sweet, I don't think that's indicative, I guess, of their fire for basketball. So you put them on the court, I don't know if they're going to be as sweet. I think that you'll see like a guy like Trace Jackson Davis try and fight and try and get out there and be aggressive in the post and use his physicality. But off the court, it'll be sweet. I mean, just because you're a nice person off the court does not mean you can't go in there and just compete on the court. And I think that's kind of the mentality of the kids they brought in, which I think is good. And I think a guy like Archie knows how to get that fire out of you, because he's a very fiery person himself.
Eddie, what's the feeling on campus from other students you talk to, or in general? You know, when we talked in October, there was a huge excitement about the season. Obviously, didn't go as everyone had hoped, but do you still think there's an excitement about the program, or do you think it's something where the students are going to have to be convinced next season to kind of jump back in with the program?
I'm not gonna lie to you. Whenever I'm like out at the gatherings that the 21-year-olds go to, people tend to come up to me because they know who I am and they know I'm the Indiana athletics guy, the Indiana basketball guy, and it's usually a lot of complaints, and it's usually turns into me doing a lot of like, hey, calm down. There are reasons for this. There's a reason why the season is not going as well as it should. There's a reason to still be optimistic. And I think you're going to get a lot of that. You're going to get a lot of people that are going to need someone to tell them, hey, there are reasons to be optimistic. Because I don't think a lot of the students on campus kind of understand that right now, because I think and that's the problem, I guess, coming into a year with such expectations, is when you fall short, it's a lot more demoralizing than the other way around. Whereas if you have no expectations, so I think it will take a little bit of convincing. I've had to do some convincing myself to try and explain to the kids that come up to me, like Jerome Hunter is really good and Rob Finney is only going to get better, but we'll see. I think it'll take a little convincing.
You've done a lot of training that would help you moderate an IU basketball forum during the season, clearly.
Oh, yeah. I'm just living real life forums. When you turn 21, that's what everything is.
You mentioned Jerome Hunter there. Among your many titles, of course, that have been bestowed upon you is Jerome Hunter beat reporter. Mm-hmm. Give us kind of a two-part question. Number one, remind everybody what kind of a player he is and kind of what his skills are and how good he is. And then just what is, as you said earlier, we don't know whether he's going to play, but what's kind of your gut feeling or your general sense on what he'll be ready for next year?
Well, I'm just get to the gut feeling. I think he'll play. Like he's put in a lot of work to get back, and a lot of it just comes down to getting his strength back in his rehab process. But he will do everything in his power to be back out there. And the type of guy he is a player, is he can do a lot of things, and he's kind of reminiscent of like a much worse version, at least for now, of Kevin Durant, stylistically. And he talked to me about that back in high school when I interviewed him, about how he was a late bloomer to basketball. I mean, he made the jump from being 6'2" to 6'8" all in the same year. Like he didn't play much basketball when he was growing up until around like 8th grade, realistically, where he really dove into it. So he's done a lot of molding of his game recently. So if you look at his shot, he told me it's very reminiscent of Steph Curry. It's not as good, but he's been trying to copy that exact motion, because if you get into basketball late, it's like you have an empty canvas where you can just figure it out from there. And Kevin Durant, because he's been such a popular player and he's kind of the same, not the same height, not the same height, but same body type, I guess, for what position they're going to be playing. He's tried to mold his game around that, and having that ability to shoot as well as get to the basket and even handle the ball at times is incredibly important. But he's versatile. He's going to be, I think, a very good defender, and he can shoot the three ball. I don't think you can ask much more of him. I think those are exactly what you want: shoot threes, get to the basket, and play good defense. And I think that's what Jerome brings you, and that's why he could be such a big boost for this team, because he fills just little facets that the team needs. And
sounds like a hell of a player to me.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember watching clips of him in high school and watching interviews. He struck me as a guy that is not necessarily outspoken, but fiercely competitive. Is that the sense that you get from him too?
Yeah, every highlight tape I've watched of him, he's just so aggressive, and it's intriguing because like you talk to him, and I got to say it again, he's a very sweet kid. Like he's just very nice and very kind, and has a good character off the floor. But there was a game that I talked to him about in high school where like the rival high school just kept chanting at him, overrated. And I saw the video of it. Like, they were very aggressive students, and it got him so riled up. He just put up like 40 points. And that's like probably the best of both worlds. He's a perfect example of a kid off the court who's just so sweet, and then on the court he is feisty, and Indiana fans are probably gonna love that.
One last question to wrap up, and I want to talk a little bit about just your experience as a student, because your first basketball season was the 2015-16 season, right? When Indiana won the Big Ten title.
Yep.
And you came from New York. You heard about Indiana, I'm sure, and then they win the Big Ten title, and there were high hopes in 2017. And now you're going to end up as one of the few seniors that goes through 4 years and sees Indiana miss the NCAA tournament for 3 straight years. And there have clearly been some great stories, and it's been interesting and compelling in its own way. But do you at all feel cheated by the IU basketball experience that you've had since you got here, especially over the last 3 years, simply because the success hasn't been what you might have expected?
No, not in any way. But I'm also a kid from New York that doesn't expect success. I think that's the perspective that an intelligent college basketball fan can provide to people here in Indiana, that it's warranted to expect success here in Indiana, but it's difficult to, just because with the changing landscape. So I just come in with the mentality of like, if you make the NCAA tournament, that's incredible. Like it's not easy to win in college basketball unless you've established something so big as Duke or North Carolina. And I've been able to see an incredibly interesting era. Probably one of the most interesting 4-year periods, where you've got Tom Crean on his last breaths and his gosh darn absurdity, but you also saw him win the Big Ten and have this weird team with Thomas Bryant and Troy Williams and Yogi running the ship. And just to see that crash down and see the coaching change and see all these different recruiting elements and everything going on with this team has been so incredibly intriguing and different. And we're either going to look back at these 4 years and say that's where it all started, or look back at it in the future and say, oh, well, that didn't work out at all. And I thought that was incredibly intriguing, but it's hard to have expectations. I understand the expectations that came into this season, but it's just so hard to have those when you haven't had that success in the past. And Indiana's on its way there. I really do think so, but I don't feel cheated. And I think I'll happily look back at my 4 years here and be able to say I saw some of the most interesting things that set up Indiana for success.
Eddie, I've been really impressed with what you and Teddy and Josh have done with the Hoosier Network. What's the future of that, as you obviously are graduating? I assume you're not going to be in Bloomington unless you take over as dean of the media school from Dr. Clavio, but which you never know. But what's the future of the Hoosier Network?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that'll probably piss off some people on the message boards that are not big fans of me and the media school. But anyway, what's next is we've been recruiting kids, and we've brought in kids from the very beginning, and they've been helping us out with basketball coverage and also doing stuff like baseball, soccer, and whatnot. So we have a pretty big net of people, and I think something that has kind of differentiated the Hoosier Network has been our ability to teach kids and be willing to be hands-on with kids. So because of that, we've had a lot of people come to the Hoosier Network asking to join because they know that that's where they can get better, and they've been taught to get better. So there's a roster of kids, names to look out for content. Kurt Spittler on Twitter will always provide you cool videos and cool pictures. Connor Hines, he will provide you plenty of comedy in his coverage. And Austin Render will be appropriately analytical and do good analysis of the program. And those three are kind of the face of the future, I'd say.
I do have one last question for you, Eddie. I have a lot of high school students that will reach out, because they're wondering about opportunities or just kind of asking questions about, about the industry, and I obviously took a very non-traditional path to, being involved in this at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious from your perspective, now that you've been through 4 years and you're getting ready to, go embark upon your postgraduate career, what kind of advice would you give to someone in high school right now who's looking to get experience and also just kind of wondering what to expect about pursuing a career in journalism?
I think the first thing, if you're talking to a high school kid, is find places you can get repetitions. It's one of those things where you just get better and better and better by just doing it and doing it and doing it. And there are so many things you cannot learn in a classroom. There's so many things I've learned that are complex about journalism, and especially sports journalism, having to deal with media relations and dealing with Indiana and the complex structure of it all and how it works here. You just need reps and reps and reps. And for a high school kid, just get out there, be passionate, drive yourself to do it. And then as you go on, also recognize the importance of being more than just the journalism. Be more than just the sports. Know more about the world. Have a personality that isn't just sports. And find places and ways to have fun other than sports. And when you get into the journalism field, know it's tough. Know it's difficult. And know that the most important thing is you find a place where you can be happy, and you find people where you can be happy. It's not about how big your audience gets. It's not how big and famous you get. What matters is if you're happy. So go wherever you go and just find that happiness. And even if journalism gets too tough for you, get out and find another way to be happy, because that's really all that ever matters.
Good stuff. Great advice. Eddie, we appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate the insight. And again, everybody go read the piece on Devonte Green. You can find it obviously on Eddie's Twitter, which is Eddie, KOTON 15, right? Is your Twitter handle?
Yeah, that's what it is. I know.
Okay. And then, and obviously we'll have it linked in the show notes too at insidethehall.com.
Perfect.
Thanks, Eddie. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com, and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.